All right, welcome everyone. Welcome to this fast-paced explainer where we're going to draw out the absolute blueprint of the human mind right here on our virtual whiteboard. Seriously, if you've ever stopped and wondered why you do what you do, how you actually learn, or what shapes your completely unique personality, well, you are in the exact right place. We're taking a pretty comprehensive journey through the science of behavior and mental processes today. So, grab a mental marker and let's start sketching out the fascinating architecture of human psychology. You see, understanding human psychology isn't just about zeroing in on one isolated concept. It's really like a giant puzzle, a holistic approach that bridges your mind, your brain, and your behavior all in context. These 6 distinct modules form the absolute rock-solid foundation of literally everything we think, feel, and do. We're looking at a discipline grounded in real scientific research that offers profound everyday insights. It's all about enhancing our understanding, our growth, and our overall well-being.
So here is our syllabus for today. We'll be navigating from the basic fundamentals of behavioral science right through development, cognition, motivation, personality, and finally into psychological disorders. Let's get started.
Diving right into Module 1, the fundamentals of psychology.
Okay, before we can even begin to understand the complexities of the brain, we really have to look at our roots. How did psychology actually evolve from early philosophy into a rigorous evidence-based science? Well, psychology's birth as a distinct scientific discipline happened back in 1879 when a German physiologist named Wilhelm Wundt opened the very first psychology lab in Leipzig. Fast forward just over a decade to 1890, and William James establishes American psychology by publishing his classic textbook, really focusing on how behavior helps us adapt to our environment. Then, boom, 1900 hits, and Sigmund Freud dramatically changes the whole landscape by introducing psychoanalysis, emphasizing the immense hidden power of the unconscious mind. And then, jumping ahead to the 1960s, we hit the cognitive revolution, a massive shift where psychologists started rigorously studying internal mental processes, things like memory, perception, and problem solving, right alongside observable behavior.
So what's the actual point of this foundational science? Well, it boils down to achieving 4 main goals. First, to simply describe the different ways organisms behave. Second, to explain the underlying causes of that behavior, like, say, discovering the biological or genetic factors behind a specific condition. Third, to predict how organisms are going to behave in certain situations based on that information. And fourth, and this is a big one for some psychologists, the goal is to control or positively modify behavior. Think about helping someone finally overcome a debilitating phobia. Once we figure out what happens and why it happens, we can actively help people change those maladaptive behaviors.
Moving on to Module 2, Growth and Development. Basically, how do we fundamentally change across our entire lifespan?
The truth is, we definitely aren't static creatures. From the very moment of conception all the way to the end of life, we're in a constant, ongoing state of physical, cognitive, and social-emotional transformation. And we actually view childhood through a bunch of different lenses. While Freud looked deeply at unconscious desires, Erikson focused more on our social interactions and conflicts. And Piaget, he completely mapped out how our actual thought processes develop. We also heavily rely on behavioral theories, where development is shaped by everyday rewards and punishments, and attachment theory, which focuses entirely on those vital, life-shaping emotional bonds we form with our early caregivers.
And human development, it constantly builds on itself. It starts right there with the prenatal period, where vital reflexes emerge while still in the womb. Next up is infancy, which is just this time of incredibly rapid physical growth and the absolutely crucial development of language. That's where simple babbling magically turns into actual listening and understanding. From there, we blossom into early childhood, roughly ages 1 to 5, characterized by remarkable cognitive leaps, the forming of those first real peer relationships, and some seriously intense social and emotional development.
Which brings us to Module 3, Cognitive Psychology, the totally fascinating study of the mechanics of the mind.
Think back to the last time you mastered a brand new skill. Maybe you learned to play a tricky chord on the guitar, or you finally figured out that new complicated software program at work. How did your brain actually make that relatively permanent change in behavior happen? Well, that is the core question of the psychology of learning.
It really comes down to 2 primary ways we learn through conditioning. On one side, you've got Ivan Pavlov's classical conditioning. This is all about those involuntary associations, like his wildly famous dogs salivating at the sound of a bell simply because they automatically associated it with food. On the flip side, we have operant conditioning, championed by B.F. Skinner.
This one involves voluntary behaviors that are shaped entirely by their consequences, meaning we rely heavily on rewards to reinforce the behavior we want to see and punishments to decrease the behavior we don't.
And learning connects directly to intelligence, which, as it turns out, isn't just one single general ability. It's actually an incredibly diverse spectrum. You might excel in visual spatial awareness like an artist, or possess high linguistic verbal skills like a writer, or maybe you have incredible bodily kinesthetic intelligence like a professional dancer. From logical, mathematical to musical, and even naturalistic aptitudes, human intelligence is just wildly multifaceted. All right, halfway through. Module 4, Motivation and Emotions. Simply put, what makes you act? Let's break down those driving forces of human action into a few key theories. First, you have instinct theory, which suggests we're driven by these fixed, inborn patterns of behavior that are just totally necessary for survival. Then there's drive theory, where basic biological needs, think hunger or thirst, create this psychological tension that we are heavily motivated to reduce. But honestly, perhaps the most famous is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's a humanistic approach, suggesting we literally have to fulfill our basic physiological survival needs, like food and shelter, before we can even think about moving up the pyramid to pursue things like social connections, self-esteem, and ultimately self-actualization.
Now, successfully navigating all of those complex internal drives absolutely requires emotional intelligence, or EI. And the great news? This is a vital, totally learnable skill. It involves perceiving emotions accurately, reasoning with them, understanding their deeper meanings, and importantly, managing your own emotional responses while accurately reading social situations. It's all about knowing when to speak up and when to just listen. In fact, often, EI is a way greater predictor of long-term success than your traditional IQ. Okay, Module 5, Personality Development. How do we actually build a meaningful identity? According to Sigmund Freud's highly influential psychodynamic theory, our personality is essentially this constant, mostly unconscious battlefield. Seriously, think of the id as that little devil on your shoulder, operating purely on the pleasure principle and seeking immediate gratification for your basic instincts. Then think of the superego as the angel, acting as your super strict conscience, holding on to all of your internalized moral standards. And caught right smack in the middle is the ego, desperately trying to realistically balance those primal desires of the id with the strict morality of the superego. But hey, Freud is just one perspective. The humanistic approach, championed by folks like Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow, shifts the focus entirely over to our vast capacity for personal potential, our freedom of choice, and self-fulfillment. Contrast that with Albert Bandura's social cognitive theory, which highlights how our specific environment, our highly developed language abilities, and our observational learning actually shape our personality traits. It's really this dynamic, ongoing interplay between our internal beliefs and the external world all around us. And finally, Module 6, Psychological Disorders, objectively examining what happens when the human mind really struggles. When it comes to the rigorous assessment and understanding of abnormal psychology, the really good news is that targeted, scientific treatments do exist for a very wide spectrum of psychological struggles. If we look at mood and anxiety disorders, things like major depressive disorder or specific phobias, cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, is frequently used to help correct those unhealthy thought patterns. For psychotic disorders such as schizophrenia, treatment often relies heavily on psychopharmacology combined with really robust support systems. And for somatic symptom disorders, where a person has physical symptoms that lack a clear medical cause, psychodynamic psychotherapy is often utilized to explore any underlying emotional conflicts. So, as we wrap up today's masterclass, I want to leave you with a final, slightly provocative thought. Take a really close look at your own actions today. Are you being driven by the social environment you've observed, by your deeply buried unconscious mind, or maybe by your own conscious pursuit of self-actualization? The human mind is incredibly beautifully complex, but by understanding these 6 fundamental modules, you now have the tools to start decoding the blueprint of your own behavior. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember, keep questioning the why behind what you do.